What do Falcons do? Rise up. Welcome to Rise Up Reactions, the show where we talk all things Falcons, NFL, Georgia sports, and in general, the sports news of the day. I'm your host, Dr. Lee Denning. I'm a board-certified family medicine physician practicing in the state of Georgia. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about the 2021 offense for the Falcons. This will more or less kind of close out my talks about last season. The draft is going to be coming up at the time of the video releasing within a couple of days. So I will probably do a recap of the draft well after the fact. I'm going to be busy during it, so I'm not going to be able to post something like a live cast or anything like that. But I just wanted to take a moment to go through the offense last year, which was not terrible. We were middle of the road, bottom end overall, but still middle of the bottom. So Matt Ryan, no longer on our team, veteran signal caller, a little bit of regression last year. 3,968 yards, 20 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. Not terrible, not great. A lot of it had to do, I feel like, with Calvin Ridley leaving the team, as well as our offensive line in general not being very good. Pro Football Focus graded our offensive line 27th overall in the league last year. We allowed 200 pressures on the quarterback. We were 29th in pass blocking overall. And in general, we had 40 sacks allowed, which was good enough to be, 12th worst in the league. So hard to be really good as the quarterback position when you're getting hit a ton. Not as bad as the Chicago Bears, who allowed 58 sacks, or the Bengals, who allowed 55 sacks. But still, when we're talking about the Falcons and the Bengals offensive line in the same breath, it's really bad. So again, Matt Ryan, no longer on our team. I wish him well. I think he's going to do well in Indianapolis behind a veteran, amazing offensive line, top 5 offensive line with a great running game, and we'll see what happens with the receiver for him. But moving on to our guys. Cordarrelle Patterson, he kind of broke out last year as a dual threat. Ended up taking over the lead running back role. I don't think he should do that again because he did taper off in the second half of the season in his effectiveness in that role. He had 153 rushes, 618 yards, and 6 touchdowns. As a receiver, he had 52 receptions, 548 yards, and 5 touchdowns. One of his key receptions coming against the New Orleans Saints last year in our win against them in New Orleans. Amazing come from behind catch. I think it was about 45 or 50 yards. Set us up for the game-winning field goal at the end. So probably the highlight from last year for me. So with Calvin Ridley, who had 52 targets, 31 receptions, 286 yards, and 2 touchdowns, stepping away for mental health reasons, and obviously not going to be on a team going forward. We had some other guys kind of step up. Russell Gage was the biggest guy from the receiver standpoint to step up. 94 targets, 66 receptions, 770 yards with 4 touchdowns. It really hurts that he is now playing for a division rival in Tampa Bay. Probably a team that has a good chance of winning another Super Bowl with Tom Brady returning. It is going to be harder this year for them to win as they didn't bring back all their starters from the last 2 years. But again, they still have a great chance, and they're probably going to win the division this year. It just adds fuel to the fire that Russell is now with them. Kyle Pitts, he really broke out last year, 110 targets, 68 receptions, not a great catch rate, and a lot of that had to do with the first half of the season where he was not particularly great. He did have 1,026 yards, only 1 touchdown though, so a lot of his production didn't end up finding the end zone, but I think that's a result of Hayden Hurst, who got 3 touchdowns off of 31 targets, amazing catch rates of 26 out of those 31 targets, only for 221 yards. But, he had 3 touchdowns compared to Kyle Pitts' 1. I think Kyle Pitts is due for about a 6 or 7 touchdown season, if not more this year, as he's one of our only reliable targets on the team. I'm not going to pretend that I know how to say Zacchaeus' first name. Olamide. I'm not sure. He was our 4th-string wide receiver who's now been thrust into the wide receiver 2 role. We did re-sign him for at least 1 more year. Last year he had 53 targets, 31 receptions, 406 yards, and 3 touchdowns. I do look for him to be kind of that wide receiver 2 guy with Cordarrelle falling back to wide receiver 1 again, especially with the addition of Damian Williams, who I'm really excited about, and I've talked about in a separate video, but I do think he's an underutilized and undervalued player that we've got for a year, and if he does really well, we might end up getting him for a couple of more before the running back tends to fall off the cliff after 30. So we'll see. Mike Davis was not the answer at running back last year. He had 138 rushes, 503 yards, only 3 touchdowns. Again, we were bad blocking for rushing last year, so I'm not sure this all falls on him. But again, I would have expected him to be just a little bit better. I was excited about that signing last year for a cheap running back, but again, we didn't even have Todd Gurley level production out of him, with Todd Gurley having no knees to run on. So I look forward to seeing Damian Williams in that role, but we'll see how things go going forward. He did have 4 fumbles, so again, he's probably going to end up being second or third on the depth chart, depending on what happens in the draft. Compared to the rest of the NFL, we were 16th in passing yards, 31st in rushing yards, 27th in rushing touchdowns. We were in a 4-way tie for 25th for passing touchdowns. And again, 3-way tie for 21st in yards per play. In fact, the only real statistic that we weren't just meh or bad in was penalties. Offensive penalties, we only had 92 overall and for 753 yards. 9 of them were from one player in Jalen Mayfield, our left guard that we took in the 3rd round last year. I'm going to talk more about him in just a minute. But the other guy that was kind of odd to see have a lot of penalties was Jake Matthews, our veteran left tackle. Now, Jake only allowed 3 sacks last year, but the 7 penalties really hurt us. So between those two guys, we had 16 of those 92 penalties. One more guy that really did stand out last year, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about him in a second, Chris Lindstrom. Pro Football Focus grades him at 84.1 overall. He only had 1 penalty and allowed 0 sacks from the right guard position. He is going to end up being our leader of the team going forward after the contract with Jake Matthews expires. And I do look for him to get a hefty contract somewhere in the 2024 range. Maybe even during the 2023 season, we're able to get a deal done. Speaking of 2023 season for him, I do look for the Falcons to sign his 5th-year option, which would guarantee him $13,202,000. His right tackle position, or I guess the 31st guy in the draft that same season, Caleb McGarry, he has not turned into the player that we wanted him to be. I don't look for us to extend him. We'll probably end up cutting him at the end of this season unless he shows significant improvement. But again, I don't look for us to go with his 5th-year option. Talking about our offensive line, again, 27th overall Pro Football Focus graded line. I argue it might have even been a little bit worse just having gotten to see the product as a season ticket holder. We weren't good. It was really, really miserable to go to every home game last year and lose all of them and watch the sacks accumulate. Again, 40 sacks given up overall, with 20 of them given up by 2 players. Left guard, Jalen Mayfield. Again, he is only graded out a 49.3 of Pro Football Focus. And before I get too deep into it, Pro Football Focus, their grades are generally used across social media to say how good a player is or not, and they're not terribly far off from being accurate. Anything about a 70 or above is decent to good. Anything 80 and above is considered stellar. 90 is elite. So Jake Matthews graded 71.4. Again, I think it was an off year for him. He did only allow 3 sacks, so that's reassuring. But the 7 penalties just really left a bad taste in my mouth. He's going to be getting $34 million this year, and then we're going to be paying him $18 million a year for the next 3 years after because of his extension. I do think he's going to have a bounce back year this year, especially on penalties. But it is going to be tough sledding on the offensive line, especially if left guard Jalen Mayfield, 49.3 PFF grade, 11 sacks allowed last year, and 9 penalties. Both of those were league leading for his position. When I talked to one of my friends who is an avid Michigan fan and an avid Miami fan, he told me when I asked him about this pick, is he going to be good? And he said that it would probably take a few years. He's not a guy that would be good immediately. He wasn't wrong. Last year obviously showed that he's not ready to play for the big boys yet, but he might benefit from sitting for another year or two and really learning the position at a professional level. So I'm not willing to write him off completely yet, but I am willing to say that he had one of the worst rookie seasons for an offensive lineman last year. Matt Hennessy was a real surprise last year. 77 grade overall. He only allowed 3 sacks, and again, not terrible overall. Chris Lindstrom, we've talked about, no sacks allowed. And Caleb McGarry, he rates in at 62.4, 9 sacks allowed. Again, not a guy that I think we're going to extend that 5th-year option to. Probably his last year on the team, most likely. And if it's not his last year on the team, he'll either be a backup somewhere. I don't look for him to be a starter for any team. So again, a lot of our woes last year on offense were because of poor offensive line play. I kind of compare our offensive and defensive line the same way. Both were really bad. We couldn't get pressure on the quarterback last year for the defense. 18 sacks overall, again, with the next worst team having 29. We got to be better. So we need to build up the defensive line, and we need to build up the offensive line. If somebody like Evan O'Neal, not going to be there. But if he fell to us at pick number 8 overall, I'd take him in a heartbeat over any edge rusher there. Or Ekwonu, I would be 50-50 shot on the best edge rusher versus him. If Cross falls to us at the number 8 overall, I don't know if we take him. It just really depends on what edge rushers are on the board, because I do think we can get a quality offensive lineman in about the 3rd round. There's not a lot of 2nd round talent, but in the 3rd round, there are some guys that probably are going to end up being really good NFL starters going forward. So again, we have 2 picks in the 2nd, 2 picks in the 3rd, and then 8th overall for the 1st round. I don't know how we're going to end up doing in the draft, and I will do a review of it following the draft, but let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Do you agree with my analysis that a lot of our offensive woes were because of the line? Do you think something else was going on? Do you think Matt Ryan's just a really bad quarterback and you're glad to see him gone? Not my opinion, but I'd love to hear from you. If you like this video, please hit the like button. It helps us out a lot. And also consider subscribing. It'll really help the channel grow in the future. But until next time, rise up.